Welcome to Hood Champion Boxing and Sports. In boxing, you find a way to win or you find a way to lose. And if you're Brian Norman Jr., you're finding a way to win. And you're about to find a way to win, to hit that jackpot. Because when you're putting on performances like what Brian Norman Jr. has been doing, it gets people's attention, and more importantly, it makes fans want to see you in the ring. Moreover, it makes Turki Al-Sheikh stop and say, okay, this is the kind of fighter that I want representing my Riyadh season cards. Now, I'm not saying everything in boxing revolves around Turki Al-Sheikh, but one thing we do know, when Turki's in the house, every day is Thanksgiving. But we also know we can take it to the stupid when a fighter tries to put all their eggs in one basket. But what I'm telling you is, Brian Norman Jr. is the kind of fighter Turki Al-Sheikh would like to see in an 18 by 18 foot ring. The problem is, he'd probably like to see him fighting Jaron Ennis, which we know that probably is not going to happen. Anyway, all this stuff about Boots ran from Norman Jr. Y'all got to stop that. Boots ain't run from him, man. And, of course, they tried to make the fight. I do believe that there's a little bit of, Eddie Hearn not really, he wants to make the fight, but at the same time kind of doesn't. Because you look at the fact that Stan Ennis got paid more money than what they were offering Brian Norman Jr. And we all know why. It's no secret. And this isn't anybody being biased or trying to, overly inflate what risk Brian Norman Jr. poses to Jaron Ennis. But I think any and everybody, no matter which fighter you favor, we all know Brian Norman Jr. is a bigger threat than Stan Ennis. So I'm not surprised to find out that Stan Ennis got paid, a good amount more. I'll just put it this way: more money than what Brian Norman Jr. was being offered. So that being said, there's no official proof that Ennis is afraid of Brian Norman Jr. So let's just hold our horses and stop taking it beyond the stupid. But I will tell you, when it comes to the timing of Jaron Boots Ennis moving up to 154, the shit is raising eyebrows. It even raised mine. I mean, Jaron Boots Ennis was so passionate about unifying, becoming undisputed at 147. They're moving up to 154. Of course, he's a big boy. What we've learned is his weight cut was very dangerous. But we know in boxing there's a lot of fighters who make that sacrifice to get their weight down to a certain point for a moment in time so they can get that green light to press forward with the fight in a division. And by the time they rehydrate, they're probably 3-4 weight classes above. But what I'll say is, this thing about Ennis and leaving the welterweight division, talking about struggles to make weight, I think if he really wanted to fight Norman Jr., I think he could have made 147 again, hire a dietitian, hire a nutritionist. You can get a proper strength and conditioning coach. He can get people there on his team that could have overlooked his weight cut to ensure that he got to 147 and he had energy and he was still able to eat the day of the weigh-in. But they opted to do something else. Now, when Eddie Hearn comes out here backing Boots, Eddie Hearn going to back his fighters 100%. Eddie Hearn will go down in flames for his fighters. When he comes out here saying Boots was only at 50% in his last fight at 147, look, I don't buy that. But I do believe any person who's cutting weight like these guys, I do believe that you can't possibly be 100% But to say he was at 50%, I find that hard to believe. It's one thing if Boots in his last fight had to cut down to 147 and could only rehydrate to 157. That's a problem. But he was able to fully rehydrate to where he wanted to be because it was a unification. And that's why he came in there and was on beast mode. Okay? But Brian Norman Jr. and his camp, they're not buying that crap. You know, the way they feel is Jaron Boots Ennis, Philly born and bred, has set aside the Philly cheesesteak and put duck sauce on the fried rice. Plain and simple. And when you think about that and you think about the failed negotiations between the two camps, lowball offers, man, you know, I really feel they should. I said it before, get a man the money. But I also understand negotiations and how Eddie Hearn is. But I did say that Norman Jr. and his dad, they're rolling the dice. And I get it. But at the same time, Norman Jr. could lose. So to me, they should have just took the money Eddie Hearn offered him. Win or lose, it's not going to kill your career. You go back now, come back and win and rebuild, but you lock that money down. But you look at what's happened now, I think I was wrong. They bet on themselves, and now they're in a position for Brian Norman Jr. I don't know what he's going to make in his next fight, but I'm pretty sure it's going to be way more than $1.5 million. I mean, he's a champion. He's an exciting champion. He knocked out Santillan. He knocked out the Puerto Rican fighter, and he damn near killed Sasaki. When you're fighting like that, knocking people out like that, you get attention, and he's getting attention. But again, Boots being scared, I think that's up for debate. But I do think that Brian Norman Sr. is in the head of Jaron Boots Ennis and Jaron Boots Ennis camp. Because Brian Norman Jr.'s dad, he's real vocal, and he has a lot to say. And I do think Boots is starting to feel some pressure. Like, damn, this may be my rival. You know, this may be the guy who I fight at some point in time to where we elevate each other. You know, he may be the Pacquiao to Floyd Mayweather. You know what I'm saying? He may be the Tito Trinidad to De La Hoya. Like this is really what Jaron Boots Ennis and Brian Norman Jr. are starting to shape into. I don't think we're there yet, but what I'm telling you is it's going that direction. The issue is Jaron Boots Ennis bubbled up to 154. But let's see what happens, because I like what Brian Norman Jr. said about, you know, what happens when a storm comes, people grab their boots and they run. And I just thought that was pretty catchy, because it's like Norman Jr. is the storm that Jaron Ennis is trying to avoid. But I also think with Jaron Ennis, you got to look at Eddie Hearn and Jaron and the trajectory they're on. Eddie Hearn's about his money. Eddie Hearn's about that Wu-Tang cream. Dollar bill, y'all. You look at a fight with Brian Norman Jr. Jaron is killing himself to make weight. Brian Norman Jr. is a high-risk fight. And maybe the money's not really there. But Jaron Boots Ennis bubbles up to 154, fights a guy like Virgil Ortiz. It's a much bigger fight. And it'll give him an interim title. Going into a fight with Murtazaliev. Much bigger fight. Much bigger threat, too. Murtazaliev is no joke. But he gets a title at 154. Much bigger money. So I could understand Eddie Hearn and the moves they're making, but I tell you what, Brian Norman Jr. and Jaron Boots Ennis would be pure chaos in a pressure cooker if they did fight. Because Boots can scrap, and so can Brian Norman Jr. I don't know if you guys are paying attention, because I hear a lot of people saying Devin Haney would beat Brian Norman Jr. I'm going to save that conversation for another video. But this is what I'll say. When Brian Norman Jr. fought Santillan, the first round, Santillan was being Santillan. Second round, Brian Norman Jr. hit Santillan with some shit and turned him into a mannequin. he stiffened up in that second round. All of a sudden, Santiago wasn't letting his hands go like he normally does. I said, yo, Brian Norman Jr. just took control of the fight. The rest of the fight went on. He ended up knocking him out cold. Had him looking crazy. When he fought the next fight, was the guy Cuevas, whatever his name was, Puerto Rican fighter. The guy came out, landed a good shot in the first round, was throwing that left hand. You could tell he's left hand dominant. Brian Norman Jr. started landing shots in that Puerto Rican fighter. He took control. The Puerto Rican fighter didn't like what he was getting hit with. He still wanted to be on the front foot and be aggressive, but you can see the energy shifted. When Brian Norman Jr. went out there and fought Sasaki, right? Sasaki came out in that first round and was trying to, on the front foot, all gas, no brakes. He got clipped. Came back out, got clipped again. From that moment on, the fight changed. But the Japanese fighter, he kept pressing, being on the front foot, being the aggressor, because that's how he fought. And Brian Norman Jr., every time he hit that man, he was hurting him. And I said it before, I'm going to say it again. There's something special about his hands. I say all that to say this. When you have a guy in the ring, right? And this goes back to what Floyd Mayweather Sr. told De La Hoya when he was fighting Mayorga. When you got a man in the ring who doesn't backing up, his ass is in trouble. And Santillana's a guy who doesn't back up. Brian Norman Jr. made him back up. The Puerto Rican fighter was a fighter who doesn't back up. Norman Jr. made him back up. Sasaki was a fighter who doesn't back up. Brian Norman Jr. made him back up. Jaron Boots Ennis has proven that he's a fighter who doesn't like backing up. What makes you think that Brian Norman Jr. can't make Jaron Boots Ennis back up? And I get it. Jaron Boots Ennis isn't Santillan. He's not that Cuevas, whatever his name was, a Puerto Rican fighter. He's not Sasaki. And I get it. And I'm telling you that I recognize that. But I'm also telling you that if Brian Norman Jr. can stay calm and composed, because he's getting better every fight. If he gets in there with a Jaron Ennis and Jaron Boots Ennis foolishly stays in the pocket, right? And Brian Norman Jr. can stay calm, composed, and land them shots, you may see all of a sudden now a man like Jaron who doesn't back up start backing up because he realizes now, okay, them sparring sessions were sparring sessions. But there's something special about Brian Norman Jr.'s hands. So I think you got to look at the boxing IQ and adaptability. Because with Jaron Ennis, what he's shown in every fight is that he's a switch hitting technician. He gets busy in the ring. You're watching Jaron Boots Ennis, he looks so vulnerable. But man, he just keeps pushing forward and just systematically breaking fighters down. His reflexes and timing are elite. That's something else about Jaron Ennis. People talk about his power, talk about the switch hitting, but not enough people give him credit for his reflexes, his timing, and controlling distance. And just when he's switching stances and his footwork, it just flows like water. Just effortlessly switching stances, moving around the ring, setting traps. That's just something that needs to be brought to the attention of boxing fans about Brian Norman Jr. and his ability to just make adjustments, round after round after round. But then Brian Norman Jr. Does a lot of great things like Jaron Ennis, but he's more raw, but he's deceptive. And I think that's why when people look at him, and I'm gonna save this for another video, some people think Devin Haney would beat Brian Norman Jr. I am telling you that shit would not happen. But I'm saving this for another video because I want to get going. Devin Haney ain't beating no Brian Norman Jr. He's smart. He's very smart, man. The way he sets traps, the way he cuts angles, and he if you watch, he's always landing big shots. That doesn't just haphazardly happen, you know what I'm saying? He knows what he's doing. He's walking fighters into these traps and these big shots. Watch his punch selection. Upstairs, downstairs, uppercut, hook, stab, jab to the body. Pull the other opponent's arm down. take his jab, throw it out there, miss, but still catch him at the head and pull him across and control him. I watched Brian Norman Jr. I'm like, yo, that dude can fight. He's smart. I see every little nuance that he does. I'm like, this dude gonna be a problem, and he's proven to be a problem. So anybody underestimating is gonna have huge problems with him. But at the same time, no matter how much I'm gonna praise Brian Norman Jr., I just think Jaron Ennis has the edge when it comes to boxing IQ and adaptability. But every fight, Norman Jr. is getting better and better. So he's catching up really fast. Now, power and finishing instinct. Jaron Ennis has that one-punch knockout power, but we learned from Brian Norman Jr. He's got it too. Both of them guys can hit you with one shot, catch you clean, and you out of here. You know what I'm saying? But what I will say is, it looks to me like both of them will more or less beat a fighter down into submission. But I think Brian Norman Jr. does a better job, at least lately, of kind of setting those traps to where he can get off that one-hitter quitter and get fighters out of there. And again, Brian Norman Jr., I watch him fight. He's extremely offensively minded. That's why he gets hit sometimes. He is all offense. But you can see him, little head movement, bending his knees, using his arms, using his hands. You can see him doing everything to block punches, evade punches, tie up the opponent if he has to, bump him, shift him, turn him. You see everything that he's doing. But he is 99.9% offense. That being said, you can tell he trains that way. That's why he's so calm in the ring. And when he's in the eye of the storm, or he's just in the middle of the storm, he ends up finding a way to get to the eye of it because he's so calm, and that's how he trains. One guy who should have beat him was Santillan, but Brian Norman Jr. trains to deal with the storm and finds a way to get to the eye. When he gets into the eye of the storm, he lets his shots go. But I'm just going to tell you, the way Norman Jr. has been stopping guys lately, I just think Norman Jr. is showing that he's meaner than Jaron Boots Ennis. And some of you may disagree, but I'm going to tell you this. Ennis is cleaner, more polished, like a surgical savage. But Norman is meaner. When you watch Norman Jr. in that ring, you watch Jaron Boots Ennis. Jaron Boots Ennis is trying to play to the crowd, talk to the crowd. It's like he wants to look good, even if he's not performing. He's worried about the wrong stuff. Norman Jr. is not worried about shit going on outside that ring. He's in there locked in, and he's looking to destroy the opponent in front of him. So when you hear the saying, we don't get paid for overtime, Brian Norman Jr., he embodies that phrase. I don't get paid for overtime. Whoever he fights next, I fully expect Brian Norman Jr. to come in there with that I don't get paid for overtime mentality and put the beans on him. And I pray to God that Devin Haney swerves him. It's okay, Devin, put the duck sauce on the fried rice and leave Norman Jr. alone. But outside of all that, the mentality, you could tell both of these guys had the pops with them. The pops help them a lot. They're both great fighters. And I'm not surprised that they were on a collision course to fight. But, moving forward, I'm not surprised Jaron Boots Ennis moved up to 154 either. But what I will say is Ennis is very composed. Brian Norman Jr. is very composed. He's very calm. Jaron hasn't really been in deep waters yet, but I think he can do it with no problem. And Norman Jr., he showed it, going over to Japan, showed a lot of character, that he can, kind of immerse himself in the smoke and make sure that when the smoke clears, he's the guy who's standing victorious. But I'm going to say when it comes to grit, I think Norman Jr. has more grit. But when it comes to poise and just a kind of smooth finish, I think that's more Jaron Ennis, man. But I just watched Brian Norman Jr. He just in there like that bull in the china shop. He there looking to break up every damn thing. So we just have to wait and see how it plays out. But Norman's pressure could create some issues for Jaron Ennis because Jaron Ennis will stand there and fight him, man. I just don't think they're going to fight anytime soon. But if Jaron Boots Ennis can use that jab, use that reach, and keep Norman Jr. off of him, Norman Jr. is going to be in trouble because he's an offense first fighter, so he's going to be coming forward. And when you're coming forward, you're exchanging because you're looking to hurt your opponent. That leaves you open. And with a sharpshooter like Jaron, who's a surgical savage, he will exploit those openings and he will start to make you pay. And it can be a very, very bad experience for Brian Norman Jr. But if he continues to get better with cutting off the ring, using angles, and able to close the gap, because he has a 72-inch reach. I think Ennis is 75. But that being said, not too much of a difference with that reach. I gotta look it up. I can't remember Jaron's off the top of my head anymore. I thought it was like 75, 76. But what I'm saying is that pressure, it could make Jaron Boots Ennis show us what kind of gas tank he has. But it could also make Brian Norman Jr. show us what kind of gas tank that he has. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's the X factor with these two, is the gas tank. I really do. Jaron ain't really. When he fought Evanescence, he had to push pretty hard because Evanescence was landing shots. But again, Jaron Boots Ennis was cutting to 147, and he had the rehydration limit. Yeah, I don't think Jaron's really showed us what his gas tank is like, but I'm pretty sure he has it. But bottom line, I think Norman Jr. and Jaron Boots Ennis is a 50-50 war. I do. Kind of leaning towards Jaron Ennis, but not like before. This fight is really shaping up to be a 50-50 fight, man. If it happens at 147, for sure. At 154, there's no reason for Brian Norman Jr. to go to 154, you know what I'm saying? Physically, you just look at the size of Jaron, you look at the size of him, you think he'd have the advantage, but you just got to look at the momentum and the mindset and just how dangerous Brian Norman Jr. is right now. So it's just hard for me to just think that Jaron's going to get in there and just, tranquilize him. Like, I'll be honest with you, I don't see that. But anyway, we'll see what happens. I think the limiting factor is that whole 147, 154. I doubt Ennis comes back down to 147. There's no reason for him to do that. He vacated his belts already. He's at 154. If he was to go back, it contradicts the narrative and the whole thing about the risk to his health to make weight. So again, he's going to say he's putting duck sauce on the fried rice. With Norman Jr. going up to 154, he may get there eventually. He's still young, he's strong, still growing, getting better. But who knows? He may jump up the right payday. If Turkey Al-Sheikh gets involved and throws $10 million his way, I'm telling you, he and his dad will take that money and fight Jaron Boots Ennis in an 18-by-18 ring. But he'd have to probably be allowed to hold on to the WBO strap at 147. He just goes up for the payday and comes back and keeps fighting. But I don't know. They say when the guys go up, they ain't the same when they come back down. So we'll see. Conor Benn may be the only fighter out there who can really move up and down and, still be somewhat effective. Anyway, man, y'all keep cool. Shout out to the veterans all 7 continents. Boots and Brian Norman Jr. These are one of those fights where the conversations are going to continue to snowball until these two eventually get in the ring. Both of those guys are offensively minded fighters. They have good defense. They can crack. They can set traps. But I'm going to tell you, they both can lose too, because they're so offensive minded. If they get hit by someone who can really crack, just like they can knock that person out, they can get knocked out too. Because this is the ultimate mashup crasher. Two guys, IQ, can adapt, set traps, pressure, stamina, power, everything you look for in fighters. This would be an amazing matchup, but I don't think it's going to happen no time soon. Anyway, stop the bullshit. Boots ain't running from no Brian Norman Jr. I think Boots is doing what's best for his career and his pockets, and you can't blame him. I just hope when he goes up to 154, he doesn't lose, because those guys are bigger, those guys are stronger than what he's used to, and we just have to wait and see how it goes. But if he goes up there and he gets clipped, then you know what everybody gonna be saying. As if Terrence Crawford had fought Boots at 147, Crawford would have knocked Boots out. So Boots has a lot of pressure going to 154 because everybody gonna be looking to see how he looks. Same way they put the hairy eyeball on Terrence Crawford. Anyway, y'all keep cool. I'm in the breaks.